I remember being at that intermediate level where I had all the knowledge to be able to have a good level of conversational Spanish. However, when it came to me actually speaking, I would make loads of silly grammar mistakes. I would forget all my verb conjugations, and I'd have these really long pauses and just high levels of discomfort when I was speaking Spanish. If I heard someone else speak that way, I'd think, God, their Spanish is awful. And yet I was the one doing it, and it was just a really, really horrible stage to be in. And that intermediate barrier is something that I think a lot of people struggle with. And in this video today, I want to help you try and overcome that, as trust me, I've been there. This was me speaking Spanish at the start of this year.
Me siento bien, he tenido una buena mañana. He tenido una buena... ¿Cómo se dice eso? Porque es demasiado palabras. Very good morning. He tenido una buena mañana. Sí.
And this was me speaking Spanish a month later after implementing this process.
11 pavos he pagado por una crema para las manos. Una barbaridad. Es una barbaridad.
And that is why I wanted to make this video today, to talk about all the different ways and all the different things that I use in order to break this intermediate barrier and reach a level where I felt confident to have conversations in Spanish. Yeah, these tips and these processes really, really helped me, and that is what I want to share with you today. And I genuinely think if you implement this plan, you can get from an intermediate level to an advanced level in 30 days. And yes, I've given away all my advice. I was initially thinking of putting this all into a course, but I've decided to just put it all on YouTube. And yeah, you might need a notepad because there is a lot of information that I'm going to sort of throw on you in this video. And yeah, there's a lot to take in. And here is the system. It is Immerse-Speak-Plug. Now this might sound a bit vague to you right now, but don't worry, we're going to break down every single one of these concepts into its own part and explain how they all work together to help you reach an advanced and then hopefully fluent level in the future. This is a process that I used for about 3 months in total to reach a level of fluency. And before we actually start breaking down the Immerse section of this, I want to make you aware of a couple of things just so you know what you're getting into with this process. And the first thing is we're going to try and completely change the way that you've probably been learning Spanish up until this point, because it's likely to reach an intermediate level of Spanish, you spend a lot of time sitting down at a desk, studying, learning vocab, going through grammar resources. I think the best way of going about it once you reach an intermediate level is basically treating it as if you live in a Spanish-speaking country. So that is one thing I want you to be aware of before we get into this. It's going to be a complete flip to the way that you've probably been learning Spanish up until now. And the second thing is, don't expect this to be easy. If you're trying to get to an advanced and fluent level of Spanish, things aren't going to be easy. You're going to be out of your comfort zone. You're going to have to dedicate quite a lot of time to learning Spanish. Sorry, if you're not interested in that, you may as well click off the video now. But if you are willing to put in the work, hopefully these tips will really, really help you. And when I say trade-offs as well, I'm talking about trading off certain habits that you might do in your day-to-day life and finding a way to basically implement more Spanish in your day-to-day life, which might be hard at first, but I think we can all agree that it's worth it to learn in a language, to have a skill that you can use for the rest of your life. So yeah. And finally, this can't be done randomly. I'm going to touch on this in quite a lot of detail towards the end of the video, the importance of scheduling in this process. And now let's start breaking down the first stage of this process, which is immersion. And obviously, immersion, what we're trying to do with this stage is expose yourself to as much Spanish as possible. The main thing with this immersion is doing 1 to 2 hours of focused listening every single day. And this might sound like a lot. Don't worry, we'll get into how you can do that later. And the reason I picked listening is the most important way to increase your immersion with Spanish, because what you're not only doing is improving your comprehension, but you're solidifying the verb conjugations, the grammar and the vocab you already know, and it's understanding more and more about how you can use what you already know in different contexts and how natives actually apply it to express themselves and get across what they're trying to say. And all of this will help your ability to conversate in Spanish as well as comprehend what other native speakers are saying, because another major issue that people have with Spanish is the speed at which people speak. And I'm sorry, the only way to really improve your ability to understand is by listening to a lot of Spanish, and that is why this is the most important thing that you need to be doing in this immersion. And the second part of this is doing as many of the immersion processes, I call them, as possible. We're going to get into those in a second. And I did say we would address the question, how am I going to have time for this? And you may be thinking 1 to 2 hours of listening every single day is a lot of work. And realistically, I'm telling you to try and do as close to 2 hours. So 1 hour realistically is the bare minimum. And unfortunately, this is where the trade-offs come into play. You've got to switch all that time that you spend listening to music or podcasts in English with Spanish podcasts. All the time that you have that you can listen to Spanish podcasts, you need to be doing it, because this is a really, really powerful thing that will help you in the long run with your Spanish. When I say listening, music does not count. Podcasts are so much more effective in terms of improving your listening, because number one, you're actually hearing conversational Spanish, so you're improving your ability to comprehend conversations and how people express themselves within a conversation. Number two, music is so much easier to get lost in the rhythms and the melody of the music instead of actually the lyrics and what the person is saying. And the next question you may have is, 1 to 2 hours really necessary? And the answer is yes, because if you're doing 15 to 30 minutes, I'm telling you, you won't get the same benefits. So yeah, make sure you aren't skimping on that listening. And now let's move on to the immersion processes that I said I was going to touch on. I'm just going to put them all onto the screen and you can have a look at them and I'll explain them in a second. These are all the ideas and all the ways that you can increase your immersion in Spanish. So turning your phone into Spanish is a very good one. This can be quite difficult to start, especially if you've got some settings that need changing around or doing updates. It can be quite difficult. Turning all possible daily habits into Spanish is a very powerful one that I used. I journal every day. It's just something that I do outside of Spanish. But what I started doing was incorporating Spanish into it. And I started writing solely in Spanish, writing to-do lists, or if you do plans for your week or whatever else, you've got shopping lists even. Just doing all of those things in Spanish is going to be beneficial for you. Another one, a very simple one, is don't watch anything without Spanish subtitles. I mean, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And the next one is try and replace all the English content that you watch with the Spanish equivalent. And the example for me was I love anything football. So what I did to implement this tip was all the time that I used to spend listening to football related content on YouTube that was in English, I flipped it with the Spanish equivalent. So people like Ibayanos, Davos and Ace, which basically is people that would interview footballers and have these debate shows on football. And it was a great replacement because I was still getting the entertainment value that I was getting out of the English content, but I was doing it in Spanish. And again, it was harder at the start. I maybe might not have enjoyed it as much at the start as watching an English one where I knew everything they were saying and all the words. But over time, you get more and more accustomed to it. And again, this is just another trade-off that will really, really help you skyrocket your progress in Spanish. And then moving on to the next one, which is quite simple and self-explanatory. If you're on social media and you use Instagram, TikTok, or Twitter, or whatever else you're using, just try and increase the amount of stuff on your feed that's in Spanish. Again, it's such an easy one to just, when you're having that sort of doom scroll, or you're in a moment where you just randomly go on your phone without thinking and you're still being exposed to Spanish, just a great way to just keep increasing that immersion without even really having to put any work into it. And the last one is a bit more nuanced and a bit harder to explain, and I probably need a whole separate video to explain the last one, but just trying to think more in Spanish. If you are going about your daily life, if you can just be, I don't know, sitting on a train and think, well, how would I say I'm sitting on a train and the train is going to this place from this place? Can I say that in Spanish? You know what I mean? When you're just going about your daily life, can you describe what you're doing in that moment in Spanish? It's kind of a skill in itself, and it's something that I've developed. I can just be walking about in my day-to-day life, and then I might have had a conversation a week ago with someone, and then I'll just randomly be thinking of, oh, could I have said that another way? Or did I say that preposition correctly? Or was that the right use of the subjunctive there? And it's quite weird and it might sound quite nerdy, but this is a really powerful tool that just helps you sort of solidify your base of Spanish. And before we continue with the video, I just wanted to say that if you are interested in improving your Spanish at a much faster rate, I'd recommend checking out the community that I created, which is called Rors Hispanic Hub. And within this community, what I'm trying to create is a group of like-minded people who are all really dedicated and willing to reach the goal of fluency in Spanish. And what you'll be able to do within this community is ask each other questions when you're feeling stuck, help each other on problems you've already solved or maybe come across, and also be able to celebrate each other's progress within the journey of learning Spanish. And on top of all of this, you'll also get access to this course in much greater depth with specific videos that aren't on YouTube, template breaking down all of the tips that you're seeing in this video, and also every single one of the 30 days of this process is broken down for you with an interactive checklist. And on top of all of this, I'm also running a 30-day competition within my community to see who can make the most progress within this course. And whoever makes the most progress will win a free call with me at the end of the month. And if you are interested in this community, there's a link in the description. And now let's continue with the video. And now we're going to move on to the final stage of this immersion, which is focused listening. As you may have seen at the start, I bolded the word focused when we were talking about the 1 to 2 hours of listening. As I've said here, this is the most important part of the immersion process, but unfortunately, focus means no multitasking. I've said already, music does not count, and also multitasking doesn't count as part of your 2 hours. This can be a really, really dangerous thing because you might have put a podcast on for 2 hours, say, when you're, I don't know, exercising and you're studying and you're doing a bit of cooking or whatever else you're doing in your life, and you might think, great, I've listened to 2 hours of Spanish, but realistically, you've probably only absorbed 10 minutes of Spanish, maybe 15. And when I'm talking about focused listening, I'm not just talking about absorbing the podcast. Can you push it a step further, which is something that I found really beneficial? And it was basically constantly trying to question if you understand what the person or what the conversation is in Spanish. So an example of this would be, if they were using the subjunctive, could you question or find out exactly why they use a subjunctive in that context, or why they use por instead of para, or why they use saber instead of conocer in that context? These are all ways that you can just solidify and reaffirm that you would be able to have that conversation in Spanish. That kind of level of questioning is just so much more beneficial. I really think it will improve your ability to comprehend Spanish and your speaking so much. I can't even put it into words. It was so beneficial for me. And again, this is another skill that you just develop over time. The more that you listen and the more that you just question things, the more it becomes natural. And for example, for me now, when I listen to someone speak Spanish, I'm constantly questioning almost every word that they're saying to make sure that I understand how they used it, why they used it, and if I could have used it myself. And it's just a really, really powerful tool that means that the 2 hours of listening that you're actually doing in Spanish can basically equate to someone else doing 5 hours. And sorry, this was the example, I didn't put it in the screen, but this is an example of, do I understand why they use subjunctive there? Or do I know why they use that preposition? And yeah, that is the end of the first part of this process. And I know, sorry, this is a lot of information. You might want to make a note of this or revisit that first section. And next, we're moving on to speaking. And the main goal of the speaking, as it says there, is getting you out of your comfort zone. Because as we've already said, one of your main issues at this intermediate level is just you're so uncomfortable speaking Spanish. A lot of it is just this discomfort and lack of confidence you have in yourself speaking. And the best way to get over this is by facing your fear, is by speaking every single day. And that is between 5 to 15 minutes is what I recommend. And I want you to record every single one of these sessions if you can. And as you saw at the start of this video, that example of me speaking Spanish at the start of this year was an example of me doing this process. That was me recording myself in my room, trying to have a conversation with myself. And I've kind of now just answered the first question at this section. Do I need someone to talk to? And the answer for that is no, you don't. Because as I just told you, I was doing this all alone without talking to anyone. And realistically, at this stage, if we're being honest, you probably don't want to talk to anyone in Spanish anyway, because you're at a stage where you're really uncomfortable. You don't want anyone to hear all the mistakes you're making and all the doubts you're having about your ability with Spanish. So it's much better for you to do this alone. And again, it just means you don't need to rely on someone else to be there. So it's better for you to just be able to do it in your own time, when you feel comfortable and when you're available, most importantly. And the next question is, what do I talk about? Because obviously, if we're doing this for 30 days, or ideally longer if you're going to reach fluency, eventually you're going to run out of topics. And I've got a couple of examples and tips that you can use. The first thing is, when you're talking, you want to be talking about as many topics as possible, because what we're trying to do is broaden the range of conversations that you can have in Spanish. Not only improve your conversational Spanish, but broaden the range of conversations you can have. So whether that be about sport, politics, your day-to-day life, about you, about your family, about where you've travelled. All of these things are conversations that you are probably going to end up having if you travel to a Spanish-speaking country or have conversations with someone over a long enough period. These conversations are just going to go down different paths, and you want to be at a level where you can go down as many paths as possible without sort of losing your way. As I've said here as well, start basing, get more complex as the 30 days goes on. So obviously at the start, when you're less confident, you just can start off with the basics, introductions, describing your family, talking a bit about yourself, those kind of things. And as the 30 days goes on, you can sort of increase the difficulty of these conversations. There's loads of different websites that have conversation starters in Spanish. You can search them all up, and that's what I did. There was loads of times where I had nothing to talk about, and I just searched up on Google 50 conversation starters in Spanish, and there'd be questions like, what would you do if you won the lottery? There's just loads of questions like that were kind of hypotheticals, and it just gets you thinking and talking in Spanish. And I'm going to touch on this later on, but there are 2 topics each week which will be constant. So realistically, you only need to find 5 topics each week to talk about. And now moving on, as you can see on the title of this page, I genuinely think that these tips will help you sort of 3 times your learning during this 30-day process. And the first one is always having word reference open on another tab or device while speaking. Because what you can do is, as you're speaking, obviously there's going to be points where you're going to run into new conversations or run into vocab that you've never heard before. And what you can quickly do is just search up on word reference what that word is, and then immediately start speaking again, because you've got that word immediately available to you that you can use. It really helps you just to remember that word, or at least it did for me anyway, because when I searched up that word and immediately used it, it just became so much easier for me to use it in the future and easier for me to remember long term. And the second tip as well is not Google Translate. When I say word reference, I mean word reference, because it gives you every single translation of one word. Because obviously, in English and Spanish, one word can mean loads of different things. Google Translate only gives you one version of that word, and it might not give you all the context in which that word applies, and you can end up using it in the wrong context, and also just not having the full grasp of what that word actually means. So yeah, I really recommend staying away from Google Translate. And the third tip, as you can see, is always having a notebook ready to write on whilst you are speaking. And this one is really important, because as you are speaking, you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and you're going to realise you're making a lot of mistakes. And you're going to come to points where you're going to question yourself and be like, is it por or is it para? Is it the subjunctive, or I don't know, this verb conjugation? And these are the kind of things I want you to write down immediately as you are speaking. I want you to make sort of a bank of all the common mistakes you're making throughout the week, because that's going to help us with the final section of this planner, which is the plug, which we will get onto in a sec. And this is really, really important. As you can see here, make a note of every time you hit a roadblock, something that you can't figure out there and then. I don't want you to just make a note of sort of the subjunctive and the big mistakes you're making. I also want you to make a note of the vocab you had to search up. Just quickly write it down before you continue speaking, because this is going to help us with something later on. And that's an example right there of making a note. And now another thing I want to touch on, which is quite a general tip, is just don't worry about making mistakes. The whole point of this is for you to make mistakes. Because even at a fluent level that I think I'm at now, I still make a load of mistakes in Spanish. And it's something that will just continue to happen, and you'll make less and less mistakes as you continue to speak. So don't worry about that at all. Don't make this process about trying to speak perfect Spanish And the next one is pausing is perfectly normal, and it does count as part of your 5 minutes. I'm not saying you have to speak continuously for 5 minutes, because you might not be at a level where you can do that yet, and that's perfectly fine. Pausing is part of the process. When I started doing this, I would pause for 30 seconds sometimes, thinking, oh, how do I say that? Or how would I make this sentence make sense in Spanish instead of just in English? These are all just parts of the learning process of reaching the advanced and fluent levels. So don't think that you're doing something wrong if you're pausing or making loads of mistakes. And finally, enjoy this process. I don't want this to be this grind. You've been working so hard to get to this intermediate level, and now you can finally start to flex all the knowledge that you have and start showing it off, and you start reaping the rewards of all your hard work. So yeah, really enjoy this stage of the learning. And now you can move on to the final stage of this program, which is Plug. I know you might have been thinking, what on earth is Plug doing? How does Plug make sense in this process? But it's short for plugging the gaps, because what you were doing when you were learning a language is just over time, just plugging more and more gaps until you get to a point where you've got so few gaps, so you've reached level of fluency. And yeah, this is the stage I think you can make real improvements and sort of elevate your speaking to a whole other level. This is the only time that you're really going to sit down and do any real studying of Spanish. I recommend doing it twice a week, and you're sitting down to learn your biggest weaknesses. And these sessions are between 30 minutes to an hour. I don't want them any longer than an hour, because I don't want you spending long periods of time where you're drudging through tasks and you're not really effective and not really focused. You want to have these short sessions twice a week where you're getting the most out of that hour or half an hour. The way you're going to decide which task to use is by going through your notebook and seeing which things you repeatedly struggled with throughout that week. And if there's something that really is holding you back in your speaking, I want you to work on that for that hour. And you can use both sessions if needed to focus on this task, whatever it takes for you to overcome these obstacles that are holding you back. And a really big tip with this is don't waste any time learning vocabulary. I don't want any time in this half an hour to an hour being spent with you sitting trying to revise vocab. No, this is again for your biggest tasks, for the things that are really holding you back from reaching that next level. And these can be things such as the subjunctive, prepositions, your ability to understand por and para, saber vis conocer, ser vis estar. These kind of things are going to be used a lot in your Spanish, and you're going to be using every day that you speak Spanish, and are things that are very important that you learn and know how to use. So don't waste any time learning vocabulary, because these are things that come along as you do the other things that we've already been talking about. And a big question that I get, and I've had with my clients who have done this process, is what if I have loads of weaknesses to work on? And my advice for this is basically just think which weaknesses you're going to use most in conversational Spanish. So which ones are going to trip you up and are going to cause you the most problems day to day when you are speaking. And just go through that list. If number one is the subjunctive, because the subjunctive you are going to be using all the time, every day, then do that one first. And then the question, like I've said earlier, is how am I going to learn vocab? Because if I'm not using these plug the gap sessions to learn vocab, well, how am I going to learn it? Because surely I'm not going to remember all of it just from searching up when I forget it when I'm speaking. And that is true. And what you're going to do as one of your tasks throughout the week is you're going to have a speaking challenge. And what the speaking challenge entails is basically you are going to create sentences that have all the different vocabulary that you learn during the week. And the challenge is basically for you to just have 5 minutes of speaking and incorporate all the vocab that you have in your notepad from that week in the conversation. So an example could be, if you learned the word vaca, which is for cows, las vacas viven en las praderas y por lo general son animales pasivos. This is an example of me learning what a word was and then implementing it into a sentence when I'm speaking. And it's likely that you're probably going to have quite a long list of these, so you should have enough to fill out 5 to 15 minutes of speaking. Because what I found is when you actually use the vocab and you put it into sentences, you're much more likely to remember it than just looking at a word on a page and trying to remember what it translates to in English. No, you're actually using it in Spanish and using it in sentences. So this is a really powerful tool that I think will mean that you will never have to sit down and learn vocab again. And that is Immerse, Speak and Plug. That is the process. But please don't click off yet. I know you might be thinking, oh great, the video's done. Let me just rewatch this section. And that's fine if you want to rewatch this section, but do not click off this video because you have not finished with this process. The most important thing is scheduling. As I said, I'd come back to the start of the video and you may be thinking, oh, this is boring. I know how to schedule things. I'll just click off now. And I'm telling you, if you don't do this, everything I've just gone through will be a waste of time for you. And this whole video will be a waste of time because it's very easy to skip a day, and this is exactly how you will fail this 30-day challenge. You need to be consistent. And obviously there's certain things that are going to come up in life that are understandable. You are going to miss days, things are going to happen. But you want to make those as few as possible and make those things that are genuinely because you had something else on and not because you were just lazy or genuinely just forgot to do it. So you need to know when you're listening and speaking, it's happening every single day. Because like I said, this is a lot of work. You're doing between 1 and 2 hours of listening every single day. You need to know when in the day you were doing that, because a lot of us are very busy. You're not going to have time to just flick on a podcast when you're sitting around your house doing nothing. So you need to sort of schedule it in and around this time that you were busy. You need to also have your plug sessions planned in before the week has started, or at least early in the week, because these plug sessions are really, really important, and you cannot skip them and think that you're going to reach this advanced or fluent level of Spanish. These plug sessions are going to require a lot of brain power, so you need to pick them at a time where you're going to have time to sit down and really focus on it without distractions and without feeling sluggish and tired after a long day at work. So you need to really plan this in throughout your week. And the most important part of the week to plan, in my opinion, is, you can have a guess, and it might not be what you think, is weekends. I think the weekends are the most important time to plan, because generally throughout your week, Monday to Friday, you have a set schedule. You're either going to school or you're going to work, and it's much easier to fit a schedule around that when you're already structured in your day. But on the weekends, you're making plans on the day with friends, you're going out, you're socialising, and these things are more sort of off the cuff and are less likely to be planned into your week. And therefore, it's easier for these habits to fall away during the weekend. So you need to really make sure that if any time you're going to plan, make sure it's the weekends. And here are some scheduling tips that I used to help me keep on top of everything when I was at busy periods. The main thing was attaching my speaking and listening to other daily habits I already do. This was really, really helpful because it meant I didn't have to try and remember, oh, I'm doing my speaking, oh, I'm doing my listening every single day. No, because I was already doing it alongside habits that were already part of my day-to-day schedule. For example, travelling to and from work, going to the gym, brushing your teeth. Again, like I've said, do listening whilst travelling, walking, taking public transport, and driving. I've put driving is not ideal because, again, you're not fully focused as kind of a multitasking thing. But when you're walking or taking public transport, these are the best times to listen because you can focus a lot more than when you're multitasking and doing other things and you're still going about your day-to-day life. And then the next thing is, do speaking when you feel focused and active, whatever time that is for you. So again, you don't want to be doing your speaking when you're feeling really tired late at night. So try and fit it into times where you're going to be as refreshed as possible and you're going to be able to really push yourself. That's a good structure that you can write down at the start of every week and know, okay, great, Monday to Friday, I'm going to listen to Spanish for an hour and 20 minutes, 40 minutes on my way to work, 40 minutes on my way home, and then after I brush my teeth at night, I will do my 5 to 15 minutes of speaking. And that's a really good schedule that you can stick to. And now, as we've already said, you need to have your plug sessions already planned in before the week has started or early into the week ideally. So for example, you might know on a Sunday evening you've got a free couple of hours, so you can easily parcel in an hour of Spanish learning into that time. And maybe Wednesday at 5:30 I'm always available and I'm quite fresh on a Wednesday. That is another great time to do a plug-in session. And again, plan weekends. I can't stress that enough. Make sure that you're doing this with the weekends. So for example, if you know you're going to be out late on a Saturday night or a Friday night, and realistically, when you get home and brush your teeth, the last thing you're going to want to do is speak Spanish. Well, can you do it before you go out? Right before you go out and meet your mates, can you just put in 5 minutes to speak? These are the kind of habits that are really going to help you get those extra 10, 20% to reach that level of fluency and a high level of Spanish. And that is the end of the video. I know that was a lot of information and that was a lot for me to try and get through. I've probably been sitting here for about an hour explaining all of this and trying to get it across right. But I really hope this video has helped you. And again, the links are in the description if you are interested. You may have seen all of this and think, wow, this is a lot of work and it's a lot of discipline, but trust me, it is worth it. I mean, I don't regret any minute that I spent learning Spanish. It's got me to the stage where I'm at now, where I love speaking Spanish and I have another language under my belt, which is incredible to say even now. And yeah, this is really, really worth it. And again, it's 2-3 months of sacrifice for a skill that you have for the rest of your life. And you'll spend the rest of your life thanking yourself for those 2 or 3 months that you put the work in and you traded and sacrificed your time. So yeah, hope this video has helped, and let me know if you want more videos like this in the future, because I'm planning on releasing sort of more videos of this style where there's a bit of a PowerPoint that I create and I sort of sit down and talk you through it. So yeah, hope this video has helped. Hope you have a good week. Hasta la próxima. Adios.